The chamber of the Galactic Council was vast and cold, built from silver metal and dark glass, floating at the heart of a shining space station above a dying star. Rows of alien ambassadors filled the circular hall, each standing tall in their own colors and symbols of power. Their voices fell silent as the council speaker raised a clawed hand, the sound of shifting feet and clicking tongues echoing softly. In the center of the room, a giant holographic map projected the Terran border. The glowing white line surrounded the blue and green heart of human space, marking a promise that had stood for decades. That line meant protection. It meant treaties. It meant that Earth and its colonies would remain untouched by the greedy hands of the other empires. But as the speaker's hand lowered, the line began to fade, blinking once, twice, and then disappeared. A sharp silence followed, the kind that is not born from peace but from the weight of betrayal. Every ambassador in the room understood what had just happened. The line was not just erased from the map. A promise had been broken. The speaker's voice echoed across the chamber, smooth and proud. From this moment forward, Terran space will no longer be protected territory, he said. It will be shared under the authority of the Galactic Council. No one needed to say the rest. Shared meant taken. Shared meant stolen. And Earth had been handed over without firing a single shot. Around the chamber, alien leaders nodded with thin smiles, their eyes gleaming with greed. They had waited for this day for a long time. For years they had seen the quiet rise of humanity, the way their fleets moved like shadows, the way their technology grew in silence. They feared what Earth would become, and now, by erasing a single line, they thought they had caged it. Across alien worlds, cheers broke out in their grand cities. Broadcast towers beamed the news through the void. The humans had been cut off from their shield of treaties. For them, it was victory. They believed Earth would bow, forced to accept council control like so many other species before. But while the aliens celebrated, deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, in a base carved from black stone and steel, a single red light began to blink. It pulsed slowly at first, then steady, casting a faint red glow on the metal walls. No alarm sirens followed. No voices were raised. The people there knew exactly what that light meant. It was not danger. It was not a warning. It was a signal. Inside the command center of that secret base, men and women in black Terran uniforms stood at their stations. Their faces were calm. No panic moved through the room. For decades, they had trained for this moment. One officer placed her hand on a control panel, and encrypted signals were sent out in all directions, silent, invisible to council eyes. Across the solar system, those signals reached deep stations hidden under oceans, buried beneath mountains, and drifting behind the shadows of moons. One by one, systems that had been sleeping for years began to wake. Screens flickered to life. Weapons that no one outside Earth even knew existed came online. And all of it happened without a single sound. On the bridge of a Terran outpost orbiting Mars, an old soldier leaned forward as the light on his screen turned green. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Everyone around him felt it in their chest. For years, they had watched the Council grow arrogant, pretending to hold the galaxy together with empty promises. For years, they had seen the whispers, the moves behind the curtains, the subtle tightening around human space. And now, with the border gone, they knew what came next. Fleets would invade. Worlds would burn. Colonies would be seized. But what the Council didn't know, what it had forgotten, was that humanity had never trusted them. They had never relied on their treaties. They had always prepared for this day. Back in the Council chamber, the ambassadors rose to their feet. Some cheered, some clapped, and some stayed silent but satisfied. They all thought the same thing, that Earth would fight alone, cornered and weak. But far below their shining halls, the humans were already moving. A single order had been given, though no words were spoken. On Earth itself, the great cities carried on as if nothing had happened. But in the hidden layers beneath those cities, old war bunkers glowed back to life. Generals stood in dim rooms, faces lit by screens displaying star maps filled with moving points of light. Each point was a fleet, silent and waiting. The betrayal was complete, But humanity didn't cry out. There were no public threats, no screaming leaders on broadcasts. The council expected outrage. Instead, they got silence. And that silence unsettled many of them. One alien ambassador leaned toward another and whispered nervously, "Why aren't they reacting?" The other only laughed and said, "Because they can't." But deep down, even he didn't fully believe it. Every species in that room remembered the old stories. Stories of when Earth was forced into war long ago, when entire empires had burned trying to cage a world that refused to kneel. Those stories had been buried in their history books, but some still remembered the fear. In the cold black of space near the edge of the solar system, an invisible satellite rotated slowly. It had been there for 30 years, silent, unseen, hidden behind a field that masked it from every scanner. At the same moment the border was erased, the red signal reached it. Its lights came on. Below its hull, an ancient code was transmitted through the dark, reaching places no alien empire even knew existed. One word carried through the void, a word wrapped in code and silence. It was not a word of surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was the kind of word that carried the weight of entire wars. As the ambassadors left the council chamber, many of them smiled, thinking their victory was complete. They didn't see the storm forming behind the stars. They didn't hear the hum of Terran engines that had been asleep too long. They didn't feel the way the air shifted in every human command center. But they would. Soon. Because Earth didn't shout when it was betrayed. Earth waited. Earth planned. And when Earth finally answered, it answered with something the galaxy would never forget. Across the galaxy, the news of the Council's decision spread like a slow, heavy storm. Broadcast towers repeated the words again and again. The Terran border had been erased, the treaty was broken, and human space was now declared an open zone. Alien fleets celebrated quietly behind closed doors, their admirals smiling in the dark. They believed they had finally cornered humanity. For decades, Earth had been a rising force, quiet and dangerous, building strength but refusing to join the Council's control. The ambassadors called it a necessary decision. But those who remembered the old wars did not celebrate. Those who had read about the Terran campaigns spoke in whispers, as if the sound of their own voices might wake something sleeping beneath the stars. On Earth, the streets looked normal at first. Traffic moved, trains ran, lights flickered over cities as if nothing had changed. But deep beneath the surface, where sunlight could not reach, massive bunkers that had been sealed for years began to hum back to life. Thick steel doors opened slowly with a low rumble. Long corridors filled with soldiers in black Terran uniforms came alive with silent movement. Nobody shouted orders. Nobody needed to. Every man and woman there knew what the blinking red light on the walls meant. It had never been used before, but they had trained their entire lives for the day it would. The day had come. Inside one of these bunkers, known only by a code name and buried 5 kilometers beneath the mountains of Alaska, a giant command table flickered with star maps. Dozens of red markers appeared across the blackness of space, marking enemy fleet positions the Council didn't even know had been tracked. For years, human intelligence networks had monitored the movements of every major alien empire, collecting information in silence while pretending to stay passive. Terran Command had let the Council believe Earth was small, careful, contained. That belief had been a weapon, sharpened with patience. A tall officer stood at the head of the room, his voice low and steady. "The line is gone," he said. He didn't need to explain. Everyone in that room had felt it when the Council made their decision. The air itself seemed heavier, as if something had shifted deep inside the galaxy. Around him, men and women in dark uniforms placed their hands on scanners, unlocking systems that had been sealed for decades. On one side of the room, massive screens displayed fleet movements. On another, encrypted messages flashed across secure channels, moving like lightning through hidden Terran networks that reached far beyond the Sol system. No one outside Earth even knew these channels existed. In orbit around Mars, a black warship that had been drifting cold and silent for years suddenly lit up. Its engines, quiet like a sleeping beast, roared to life with a deep hum. Inside the ship, lights came on one by one. Crew members walked to their stations in complete silence. No speeches, no alarms, just a quiet acceptance of what was about to begin. A message came through the main channel. Only 2 words were spoken, Iron Protocol. And just like that, across the solar system, hundreds of ships received the same signal. Some were hidden inside asteroid belts, some disguised as mining stations, others buried under ice on moons and forgotten outposts. All of them had been waiting for this exact moment. In the outer colonies, civilian life shifted as if a cold wind had blown through it. Traders locked their doors. Transport ships vanished from the lanes without a trace. Military convoys changed their course without any public announcement. On the mining world of Callisto, children playing outside fell silent as they saw old military banners being raised over government buildings. Banners most of them had only seen in history books. The sky darkened as massive defense platforms that had been hidden in orbit powered on, revealing their enormous steel spines like the bones of a sleeping giant finally waking. Across alien territory, whispers spread fast. News of Terran silence unnerved many who thought this would be an easy victory. They expected rage, they expected speeches of defiance, but none came. Earth didn't answer the council with words. It answered with nothing. And nothing, to those who knew Earth's history, was far more terrifying. One alien leader from a distant world looked at the holomap in his private chamber and whispered to his aide, "This silence, this is how it always starts with them." The aide did not reply. There was nothing to say. On the far side of the solar system, past Neptune, an old Terran structure rested on the surface of a frozen rock. It had no name, no beacon, no broadcast. It was built in an age when the galaxy believed humanity was weak and isolated. Inside that structure sat rows of old war computers, silent for generations. When the red signal arrived, they lit up, their screens glowing like cold fire. One by one, they began activating the outer defense grid, a network no alien spy had ever discovered. Thousands of hidden satellites rotated in unison, their dark metal hulls opening to reveal the long barrels of kinetic cannons. Not a single alien fleet commander knew what was now pointing directly at their borders. In the Galactic Council's military wing, the first reports of Terran movement began to trickle in. A few outposts along the border had gone dark. Scout ships vanished from their assigned paths. Long-range scans of human space returned nothing. The admirals dismissed it at first, thinking it was simply a communications delay. They had grown soft in their certainty. They believed humanity had no real power beyond its colonies. But deep down, some of them felt it. A quiet fear they tried to ignore. Back on Earth, in a hidden war room beneath the Pacific Ocean, a woman wearing a long dark coat walked to the center of the command table. Generals stood as she entered, but she raised her hand, telling them to sit. Her voice was calm as she spoke. "They have made their choice," she said, her eyes fixed on the red line glowing on the map. "Now we make ours." The words were not loud, but they carried like a blade sliding out of its sheath. Around her, officers straightened their backs. Everyone in that room knew exactly what was about to happen. 4 years, humanity had listened to the Council's promises. 4 years, it had pretended to be one of many, playing by their rules while building its own quiet empire in the shadows. But the Council's betrayal had not cornered Earth. It had unlocked the very thing they feared most. The Terran fleets were ready. The network was ready. The soldiers were ready. In the cold dark between the stars, a single unspoken truth spread through every hidden Terran outpost. No one survives when Earth fights for real. The Council thought it had made a clever move. They believed they had forced humanity into submission. But humanity didn't bow. Humanity prepared. And now, as the galaxy watched in silence, the storm that had been sleeping began to rise. Engines roared to life where no one thought they existed. Orders spread like fire through cold space. Old ships turned their guns outward. Every star on the Terran border suddenly felt sharp, like the edge of a blade being pulled free. The betrayal had taken only seconds. The answer would last far longer. In the Black Sea between the stars, where the Council believed they held control, the silence began to shift. It was not a roar. It was not the kind of noise that fleets made when they gathered for war. It was quieter, heavier, Like the air before a thunderstorm that no one can stop. Alien fleets began to advance along the erased border, moving with confidence, their ships glowing like bright silver specks in the endless night. They had come expecting a frightened enemy. They thought they would meet scattered patrols, unprepared defenses, desperate diplomats begging for mercy. But instead, they met nothing. Not a single ping. Not a single signal. Human space looked empty. At first, the alien admirals smiled. To them, silence meant weakness. They ordered their ships forward, engines burning bright, scanning systems reaching deep into the black. Their fleets moved into Terran territory like a wave. But the deeper they went, the stranger it became. Communication signals flickered. Long-range scanners began to show nothing but static. Navigation systems faltered for seconds at a time. Something was wrong, but none of them could see it. Terran space was not empty. It was watching. Hidden behind the shadows of dead moons and broken asteroids, Terran ships waited. Their hulls were painted black, swallowing the starlight around them. Their engines burned cold and invisible. They moved slowly, patiently, like predators circling prey that didn't even know it was surrounded. These weren't the fleets that the Council thought humanity had. These weren't the ships they could track in open space. This was the Black Fleet, a name whispered in alien military archives, buried deep beneath layers of history that most had chosen to forget. Aboard one of these ships, the Iron Dawn, the bridge was silent except for the soft hum of the engines. Dozens of crew members stood at their stations, eyes locked on glowing tactical maps. Red dots moved across the screen, alien ships advancing. Blue dots lay still, waiting. At the center of the bridge, the Admiral stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face calm. He didn't give a speech. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said 2 words, Phase 1. Across the entire Black Fleet, those words echoed like the pull of a trigger. In the next moment, hundreds of Terran warships vanished completely from every alien sensor grid. They didn't turn invisible. They were already invisible. Instead, they struck. Silent black ships slid through the dark, surrounding the alien vanguard without firing a single shot. First came the jammers, thin, needle-shaped drones that slipped between the alien formations and drowned their communications in a storm of ghost signals. Captains shouted orders to reconnect, to re-establish links, but every channel only came back with static. A fleet without a voice is not a fleet. It is a herd. On the alien flagship, the Admiral leaned forward, confusion twisting his scaled face. "Why are we losing signal?" he barked. His officers scrambled at their controls. "It's the Terrans," someone whispered, but even then, none of them truly understood how fast things would collapse. From the darkness, the first shots came. Not loud, not chaotic. Precise. A single railgun slug cut through the void like a whisper, slamming into an alien cruiser before its shields even registered the threat. The ship cracked in two, splitting apart in silence. The crew didn't even have time to send a distress call. A moment later, another alien ship went dark. Then another. Then 5 at once. Across the alien fleet, panic flickered like fire on dry grass. Alien captains tried to regroup, shouting orders to turn their ships, to raise defenses, but their formations were already broken. Their sensor arrays showed only a blur of static and shadows. It was like fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Ships turned their guns in every direction, firing wildly into empty space. Terran warships slipped between them like smoke, striking engines, targeting power cores, slicing apart entire battle groups in minutes. In a matter of hours, more than 100 alien ships had gone silent. No grand battle. No glorious stand. Just darkness swallowing them one by one. The Council had expected humanity to fight like they did. Noisy, proud, predictable. But humans fought like ghosts. They didn't give their enemies the satisfaction of seeing where the blade came from. The alien admiral slammed his clawed fist on the console, shouting, "We have the numbers. Form a wall." But even as he spoke, his command ship shuddered. Lights flickered. The power grid collapsed without warning. The Black Fleet had already slipped past their front lines. Terran cyber warfare drones had infected their systems the moment they crossed the border. Their ships weren't just being destroyed, they were being controlled. On the Terran command deck, the Admiral watched the map quietly. Every red dot that vanished was another alien ship gone. His officers worked like parts of a machine, their movements clean and practiced. A young comms officer whispered, "Their vanguard is collapsing." The Admiral only nodded and replied, "Good. Phase 2. From every shadow, the Terran fleet finally revealed itself. Hundreds of ships lit their engines in the dark, forming a wall of steel and black fire. For the first time, the alien fleets saw what they were facing, and their confidence cracked. These were not outdated warships. They were massive, angular, built for war, not for show. No colors, no banners, just a silent wall of fury. The alien captains felt it then, the thing their history had tried to bury. This was what it meant to fight humans when they were cornered. The alien flagship tried to pull back, engines roaring. "Retreat! Form hyperspace lanes," their admiral shouted. But the routes were already gone. The hyperspace channels they depended on had been jammed minutes earlier. The Black Fleet had sealed them inside a cage before the first shot was ever fired. In the council chamber light years away, ambassadors received the first reports of the assault. Not images. Not clear battle logs. Just static and one repeating transmission, signal lost. Their fleets were being erased faster than they could process. Panic spread through the room as they realized they had underestimated their enemy. They had betrayed a power they never truly understood. Back at the border, the alien admiral stared at his failing screens. He saw shadows moving in the black. He saw his ships burning silently, one after another. And then he heard it, one final message that came across the channel. A single Terran voice. Calm. Unshaken. "You shouldn't have crossed the line." And then his world went black. In a single night, an entire alien armada, the first wave of the Council's betrayal, was gone. No broadcast. No survivors. Just silence. It was not just a defeat. It was a warning. And the galaxy would soon understand what that silence truly meant. The void along the border burned quietly, not with endless noise, but with the cold precision of something older than the Council's arrogance, war forged in silence. The alien fleets that had entered Terran space so confidently only hours earlier now drifted like broken metal in the dark. Their proud formations were gone, their command structures shattered, their voices lost in a storm of static. What had begun as an invasion was no longer a battle. It was a slow, surgical destruction. And it was far from over. On the bridge of the Iron Dawn, Admiral Kincaid stood perfectly still. His officers moved around him like the gears of a single machine. Every voice was calm, every motion rehearsed. The air was tense but steady, like a blade balanced on the edge of a fingertip. In front of him, the war map glowed bright blue. Red clusters, Council fleets, were blinking in and out as Terran strikes erased them one by one. He didn't need to give loud commands. One soft word was enough. When he whispered advance, entire fleets moved. From the shadows, the Terran armada came into full view for the first time. Hundreds of warships emerged from the dark like steel giants, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, carrier vessels, and black stealth destroyers. Their engines ignited with a cold blue light that painted the void in a color the galaxy had learned to fear a long time ago. The alien admirals, scattered and broken, finally saw what was hunting them. Their hearts froze. The aliens tried to regroup. Messages flew between their ships in panic. Form a line. Hold positions. Regain communications. But nothing worked. Terran electronic warfare drones had turned their networks into silence. Their ships were deaf and blind. The only thing they could see were the flashes of their own fleets being torn apart. A cruiser tried to raise shields. 3 Terran railgun slugs pierced it before the command even finished processing. A carrier launched its fighters. They vanished in a storm of guided munitions. One after another, alien ships flared and died without ever landing a solid blow. The Council had called this war before the galaxy. They believed they would intimidate humanity. They believed they could make Earth kneel. But what they had walked into was not a conventional war. It was a trap. Decades in the making. Above the chaos, Terran battleships advanced in silence. They didn't roar. They didn't boast. Their hulls bore no banners, no colors. They were painted matte black, their silhouettes sharp and angular. They looked less like ships and more like blades. Massive kinetic cannons fired silently across the void. Railgun rounds sliced through shields and armor like paper. Missile swarms cut through escape routes, exploding with surgical precision. Entire alien fleets broke under the weight of strikes they could not even see coming. On the alien flagship, alarms screamed. Red lights flashed. Officers shouted over one another, trying to make sense of the unreadable data on their screens. The admiral's face was drenched in sweat, his scaled hands shaking as he barked orders that no one could carry out. Turn the fleet. Form a defensive wall. But half their thrusters were dead. Half their ships weren't even responding. Somewhere outside the viewports, a Terran dreadnought slid silently across their flank like a shark in deep water. They never even saw the main guns fire. The blast ripped through their entire formation. Ships crumbled like toys thrown into a storm. Flames blossomed inside pressurized hulls, turning warships into burning metal skeletons drifting through space. The alien flagship shook violently, throwing its crew against the bulkheads. The admiral looked up at the viewport and finally saw it clearly. A wall of Terran ships advancing without mercy, their formation tight, their movement flawless. Not a single vessel hesitated. This was not a counterattack. This was a message. In the Galactic Council's war room, panic had already taken root. The reports were fragmented, but they all said the same thing. Fleet 1, destroyed. Fleet 2, no response. Fleet 3, dark. Ambassadors shouted at each other. This is impossible. They don't have the strength for this. Where did those ships come from? Their military analysts scrambled for explanations. They had believed humanity had only a fraction of these ships. They had believed Earth's power was exaggerated. But the truth was worse than any of their guesses. Earth had never shown them its real power. In the lower decks of Terran carriers, soldiers sat in drop bays, helmets in their hands, weapons checked. They waited for the signal to board. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They were the second wave, the silent knife that would carve out whatever the railguns didn't finish. Dropships hummed quietly in their cradles, engines primed to tear through alien hulls the moment the order was given. The Terran military didn't believe in giving the enemy time to recover. Back at the front, the alien lines finally broke completely. Captains screamed for retreat. Hyperspace coordinates were fed into their systems, but the escape lanes were already sealed. Terran interdiction fields, massive invisible nets, wrapped the battlefield. The aliens were trapped like insects under glass. Some tried to ram their way out, throwing their last strength against the wall of Terran warships. But the humans didn't budge. Railgun rounds cut them down before they ever got close. In one corner of the battlefield, a cluster of alien destroyers desperately turned away, engines flaring, hoping to escape around a dark moon. They never saw the Terran fleet waiting there. It emerged from the shadows in perfect silence. The destroyers didn't even have time to scream. They were erased in seconds, their wreckage spinning into the void. The battle was no longer a battle. It was an execution. Every Terran shot was measured, every move calculated. And through it all, humanity spoke no words. It let the silence do the talking. On the bridge of the alien flagship, the admiral fell into his chair, breath shaking. His communications officer whispered, voice hollow, "We can't fight this." He stared at the cold blue glow of Terran engines surrounding them and felt the weight of an entire galaxy's mistake. They had thought they could break humanity, but they had awakened something else entirely. Kincaid watched the war map as the last enemy formations collapsed. He didn't smile. There was no joy in this. Only the cold satisfaction of precision. He gave the next order quietly, like a man reading a clock. Push them back to their worlds. His officers nodded and moved as one. Fleets rotated. Formations shifted. The next phase of the war began. By the time the stars fell silent again, the Council's first invasion force no longer existed. Not scattered. Not broken. Erased. The black void was littered with drifting metal, cracked hulls, and frozen bodies. Humanity didn't claim their territory. It didn't raise flags. It simply left the remains floating, a message carved into the stars themselves. And far away, on worlds that had once cheered for the Council's betrayal, whispers began to spread like smoke. They said the humans didn't scream. They didn't beg. They simply waited. And when they finally struck, they struck with a fury that could not be matched. The Council had betrayed Earth. But the galaxy had just learned that betrayal came with a price. A price written in fire and silence. The aftermath of the Council's invasion hung heavy over the stars like a storm that had already passed but left the air charged and waiting for the next strike. What was once a proud and massive invasion force was now a graveyard of drifting metal. Broken ships spun slowly in the void, their hulls still glowing faintly with heat. Debris fields stretched for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, silent witnesses to what had happened here. There was no sound in space, but every alien who survived swore they could still feel the echoes of the Terran attack. It wasn't just a defeat. It was the kind of blow that changes the shape of entire empires. In the heart of Terran command, beneath layers of steel and ocean, massive war rooms glowed with shifting maps. Red enemy positions that once flooded Terran borders were disappearing one by one, replaced by neutral gray markers or cold blue Terran control zones. It wasn't luck. It wasn't desperation. This had been prepared for decades. Every corridor, every route, every trap had been designed for this exact moment. Humanity hadn't reacted to the Council's betrayal. Humanity had been waiting for it. On the surface of Mars, the orbital shipyards were burning with light. Massive hangar doors opened like the jaws of sleeping beasts, and ship after ship rose into the void. Some of these vessels hadn't moved in generations. Others had been hidden deep underground, shielded from all scanners. The Council had always underestimated Earth. They thought the humans were a minor power, loud but manageable. They never understood that humans never showed their full strength, not to their enemies, not even to their allies. As the fleets rearmed and expanded outward, the remnants of the Council invasion tried to retreat. They sent broken, fragmented signals begging for reinforcements, for rescue, for anything. But none came. The Council's core fleets were still scattered across distant sectors, unprepared for the scale of the response they now faced. Their command network was collapsing like a house of glass in a storm. Inside the Council's main war chamber, panic was no longer hidden behind diplomatic language. Ambassadors who had once smiled with arrogance now shouted over each other. "This is impossible," one yelled. "They shouldn't have been able to respond this fast," another barked. A trembling officer brought up a holomap of the border. Where once red marked their control, now only Terran blue remained. Fleet after fleet had gone dark. No one even knew how many soldiers were alive. The truth was simple. The Council had been outplayed. They didn't know it yet, but their war was already lost. On the alien frontier worlds that had supported the betrayal, silence spread like disease. News of the defeat arrived before official transmissions. Traders whispered it in dark markets. Smugglers carried the story in their eyes. Entire populations began to realize what their leaders had done. The Council had poked a sleeping wolf and then turned their backs. And now that wolf was moving. In orbit above Europa, one of the Terran fleet coordination stations buzzed with quiet, precise activity. Commanders stood in neat rows, reviewing synchronized operations across dozens of sectors. There was no shouting, no frantic planning. Every step had been decided long ago. Terran fleets moved like a living machine, striking deep into Council supply chains, dismantling communications, severing jump routes, isolating entire regions of enemy space. It wasn't about overwhelming power. It was about cutting the enemy apart piece by piece until they couldn't breathe. In alien systems, panic grew. Colonies loyal to the Council woke up to find Terran ships hanging in their skies, silent and black, waiting like executioners. No invasion fleets. No bombings. Just presence. That was enough. Local governments surrendered without a shot. Others tried to resist, but their defense networks had already been compromised. Terran intelligence had been inside their systems for years. Before their generals could even shout orders, their missiles were disabled, their shields offline, their fleets immobile. On one council capital world, a governor stared at the black silhouette of a Terran battleship drifting above the city's orbit. It did not fire. It didn't need to. Everyone on the planet knew that one order from that ship could erase their world from history. And what terrified them more was that no one doubted the order would be given if needed. Humanity didn't bluff. In the Council's military high command, the last fragments of their great fleets tried to regroup. But the messages between their admirals were filled with panic. Some of their leaders fled their posts entirely, retreating to safe worlds far from the front. Others tried to organize counterattacks, but those plans collapsed before they began. Hyperspace lanes were blocked, shipyards sabotaged, resource convoys intercepted. Their military had been cut at the knees. In sharp contrast, the Terran war effort was quiet. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of war shouted across the stars. Orders were delivered through encrypted channels, spoken in calm voices. Fleets moved with precision. Special units slipped behind council lines to dismantle key defenses. Orbital mines sealed strategic choke points. Black Fleet units targeted command ships with surgical strikes. In less than a week, entire sectors that had been controlled by the Council were effectively under Terran control. Not through conquest, but through collapse. The alien powers had grown so used to their own dominance that they didn't know how to fight a silent enemy. An enemy that moved without fanfare, without warning, without hesitation. On one Council world, an alien officer stood at his post watching Terran ships fill the sky. His hands shook. "We can't fight them," he whispered. Around him, other officers lowered their weapons. Their defense grid had been disabled remotely. The humans had already been inside their systems before they even realized a war had started. In the council chamber, the Chancellor stared at the war map in disbelief. Fleets gone. Systems lost. Allies silent. "Why aren't they negotiating?" he demanded. "Why haven't they made demands?" But no one could answer him. That was the most terrifying part. Humanity wasn't asking for anything. No ultimatums. No lists of conditions. Just action. Back on Earth, the war rooms were calm. The leaders didn't raise their voices or pound their fists. They didn't need to. "Keep pushing," one of them said softly, and that single order sent entire fleets into motion. No fireworks, no cheering crowds, no victory speeches. Just quiet, efficient war. By the end of the month, the Council's military was a shell of its former self. They hadn't just lost battles, they'd lost their ability to fight. Entire colonies switched sides without firing a shot. Even some of the Council's inner members began to whisper in fear. If humanity wasn't here to conquer, then what were they going to do? And that silence, that question hanging in the air, was worse than any threat the Council had ever faced. The galaxy had always seen humanity as dangerous. But now, as worlds fell without explosions and empires crumbled without demands, it understood something far more terrifying. Humanity didn't need to be loud to win. It only needed to whisper once, and the stars would bend. The Council's great chamber, once the heart of galactic power, had grown unnaturally quiet. The vast hall that had echoed with centuries of commands, debates, and threats was now hollow, its light dimmed, its seats half empty. Delegates who once walked with pride through its gleaming corridors now shuffled like frightened shadows. The banners of their empires hung limp in the stale air. Outside, beyond the station's grand windows, the stars burned cold and distant, and scattered among them like silent predators were Terran warships, black as the void itself, waiting without moving, without a sound. They did not need to fire anymore. Their presence was enough. Across the galaxy, the Council's power had unraveled like old thread. Entire sectors no longer sent reports. Fleets that once numbered in the thousands had gone silent or defected. The colonies that once declared loyalty now lowered the Council's banners overnight. No great battles tore them away. They simply fell, piece by piece, under the weight of quiet Terran pressure. Terran fleets hung over worlds like storm clouds. People knew they would never strike unless provoked, but they also knew that if they did, there would be nothing left. Inside the chamber, the Chancellor slammed his clawed hands on the table, his jeweled horns gleaming under the weak lights. "Where are our fleets?" he shouted. His voice cracked with fear. No one answered. They had already received the last message from the Outer Rim hours ago. Static, then nothing. There were no fleets. Only wreckage and silence. "Why haven't they made demands?" he whispered. But the ambassadors had no answer. It was the one thing that terrified them the most. Humanity had taken no planets, claimed no throne, made no lists of terms. It simply stood outside the council's walls, silent and waiting, like a blade at a throat. Far away, on the bridge of the Iron Dawn, Admiral Kincaid watched the war map that stretched across the entire galaxy. Once, it had been crowded with red markers, council power blotting out entire sectors. Now, only scattered dots remained, blinking weakly like dying embers. His officers stood behind him in perfect silence, their uniforms crisp, their faces calm. None of them cheered. None of them smiled. This was not victory. This was balance being restored. Kincaid lowered his voice. "Signal the envoy." A comms officer nodded and transmitted the order. From one of the black warships in the fleet center, a single shuttle detached and began to drift toward the massive station where the council waited. No escort followed. No fleet moved. Just one small, dark ship cutting through the void like the tip of a spear. Inside the council chamber, alarms whispered softly as the shuttle approached. The guards were nervous. The ambassadors whispered to each other. Some said the humans were coming to declare war officially. Others thought they'd demand the surrender of entire empires. But the older ones, the ones who still remembered the ancient stories of Earth's last war, didn't say anything. They just lowered their eyes. The shuttle landed in the center of the council station with no sound, no ceremony. The airlocks opened slowly, and one Terran envoy stepped out. No soldiers followed him. No guards. No flags. Just a man in a black uniform with a single red emblem on his chest, the Terran Eagle. His boots echoed softly as he walked through the empty halls toward the chamber. Every step was measured, unhurried, controlled. The council guards held their weapons tightly but didn't raise them. They all knew that if this single envoy didn't return, the entire station would vanish in minutes. When he entered the chamber, every eye turned toward him. The Chancellor rose, trying to look powerful but only managing to look tired and afraid. "Human," he said, voice shaking slightly. "What is it you want?" The envoy didn't sit. He walked to the center of the chamber, placed a small black case on the table, and pressed the lock. It opened with a soft click, revealing a single glowing crystal. The council members leaned forward nervously as the hologram flickered to life above it. A red line appeared, a glowing border around Terran space. The same border they had erased. And beneath it, projected in hundreds of languages at once, were two simple words: never again. The Chancellor's breath caught. "That's it?" he asked, his voice small now. "No demands? No conditions? No punishment?" The envoy's eyes were steady, his voice calm. "You already punished yourselves," he said. "We only drew the line again." The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the walls feel closer. Around the room, ambassadors exchanged glances. They had expected ultimatums. They had expected their worlds to be seized. But humanity wanted nothing. No crown. No control. Just a border. A line they had crossed once. A line they now knew could never be crossed again. Outside the station, the Terran fleet remained perfectly still. Hundreds of warships filled the darkness like a wall, their cold blue engines glowing faintly. Alien fleets would remember this image for centuries. Humanity standing at the edge of the stars, not conquering, not begging, simply existing like an unmovable storm. On council worlds, the people whispered the story in every bar, in every factory, in every city. They whispered how the humans didn't invade, didn't demand tribute, didn't speak in long speeches. They whispered about how the fleets came like shadows and erased armies in hours, and then vanished without taking anything. The council's citizens began to question the strength of their leaders. Many no longer believed in the council's power at all. Some started burning the banners at night. Others began to paint quiet red lines on walls and floors, the symbol of the line the humans had redrawn. Back on Earth, there were no celebrations. No fireworks lit the skies. No leader stood on a podium to shout about victory. Humanity didn't see it as a conquest. This had never been about power. It was about trust that had been broken and a lesson that had to be burned into the galaxy. Terran fleets slowly returned home, silent giants fading back into the dark. Shipyards opened their gates to swallow the warships again. The Black Fleet went back into the shadows. Soldiers returned to their barracks. Command centers powered down their maps. The storm had passed, but its memory remained. The galaxy would not forget what happened. It wasn't the size of the Terran fleets. It wasn't the number of weapons. It was the silence. It was the way humanity moved like nightfall, unavoidable, final, leaving no room for negotiations. Empires feared that kind of war. Empires remembered that kind of war. The Chancellor stood alone in the chamber after the envoy left. The hologram of the red border still floated before him. "Never again," he whispered, the words tasting like iron in his mouth. He understood now what so many before him had failed to understand. Humanity did not fight for territory. Humanity fought for lines. And when someone crossed that line, they didn't just fight back, they erased the threat. In the years that followed, no empire dared test Earth again. The border stayed exactly where it was. The council remained, but it was a council built on fear, not power. And deep beneath the stars, hidden in the dark, the Black Fleet slept once more, watching, waiting. Because the one thing the galaxy now knew for certain was this: if anyone crossed that line again, they wouldn't get a warning. They'd get silence. And then, they'd be gone.